You have found the Open Eclectic Podcast, where Nate and Josh talk about everything from mobile games to books to pet peeves to cars to toys. Our interests run eclectic and we're open to more. Welcome to the Open Eclectic.
Alright. Well, welcome, friends, comrades. Not said lovers, but no. That depends on depends on the type of love, you know.
Probably not a lot of,
you know, whatever the Philadelphia cream cheese and the
brotherly love
and whatever else the other ones are. You know, it could technically be, yeah, brotherly lovers. But that just sounds weird. Yeah, would you just like go around and be like, "Sup? Yeah, this is my friend Josh. We're lovers." Be like, "What? Oh no, not like that. No, we're brotherly love. You know, the brotherly love." And just having to like explain that to people all the time. That'd be a great premise for a show. It wouldn't go very far.
It would be. So there's an episode of Doctor Who where the doctor is trying to describe his friend, but the woman that he's talking to thinks that, and it's James Corden, it is his, like, you know, spouse, boyfriend, husband, or whatever. And so she's like she's like really encouraging, like, oh, you know, whatever you guys call it is fine, love. I'm okay with it. And he's like, do you think companion's an appropriate word? And she was like, well, most people say partner. And he's just talking about, you know, James Corden like they're friends.
An
and
item.
This woman is definitely thinking that they're espoused,
so
or something.
Is James Corden like the late night host guy?
Yeah. So he was on so far 2 episodes of Doctor
Like recently,
Who.
or is this like
again? He was an actor before he was.
I've heard
the
he's
late
kind
night
of
guy.
a jerk. Like he's
No, it was a
not,
while
like,
ago.
People don't.
So yeah.
The hive mind of Reddit, anyway, doesn't seem to like him. He was also in Cats, the new Cats movie. Pretty much everybody is a mistake.
Well, that was a mistake.
Made a mistake for being in that. They're not a mistake, but you know, that's harsh.
Some of them might have been. I don't know. It's possible. I didn't see it. I saw like an ad for it when the TV was on mute, and I was like, I am going to make a point to not watch that.
It looked really... I've read a lot that he was not good, but the whole thing just looked really kind of disturbing, like CGI. You know, when it was all just practical effects, like, you know, I haven't seen the old one. Or did they? Was there actually a movie, or was it just like musical? That
I'm not sure. I heard they dipped really hard into like the uncanny valley.
Yeah.
Too much, and they should have either like fully committed to CG or practical. But because they married them together really well, but it also made it look like they didn't marry them together well enough at the same time.
Yeah, it's
and
like
that just botched it.
Why couldn't they have just done it like practical effects again? I don't know, because they needed an excuse to spend a ton of money on CGI. I don't know, just
I guess they should have just gone full animated, in my opinion.
Like traditional animated or computer, like
don't care either.
Stick figures, do that.
I feel like that would work.
That'd be really funny.
I think based on the reviews I've heard, that stick figure cats would have been better.
Yeah, whatever that was. And they had so many like big names in it. It was just like
huge.
Wasn't like Helen Mirren in it and Taylor Swift and
yeah,
other people.
Was Idris Elba in it?
That sounds right. That sounds.
Yeah.
You know, okay. So speaking of Idris Elba, I know that he's been connected to the James Bond franchise in the past. I don't know what's going on with that, but I saw a headline today that said Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson wants to be Bond because one of his relatives played a villain in one of the old Bond movies. And I'm like, that's cool.
Yeah.
But then I'm like thinking, I don't think that The Rock could pull off Bond. Would he be an American Bond, or would he try to do an accent? Or, I mean, you can't be an American Bond.
Can The Rock do an accent?
He does.
I've never heard him do an accent.
He does The Rock.
His own, yeah. The closest to an accent he's done is when in his wrestling days, he actually had a little bit of like a Shatner cadence going on.
Oh.
So he'd be like, can you smell what The Rock is cooking? And it had this just different beat to it, which I'm glad he doesn't do in every movie now.
Yeah.
I think he's too big.
Yes.
I think he's too American.
Yes.
And I think Trevor Noah, in one of his stand-up routines, talked about why there can't be why Bond has to be white.
Really? Okay.
And he was like, the whole point is that James Bond can go anywhere, blend in with any crowd. He dresses up and suddenly he's posh, dresses down and suddenly he's like, thug and rough or whatever. And no matter where you go, there's white people. And he was talking about how, like, he didn't realize it until he was in, Ireland maybe? Or a European, one of the smaller European nations, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, and you looked around, he's like, and I realized that there was no black people. None. So could you imagine, like, Idris Elba? He was like, I was really excited when I heard that he might be playing James Bond. But then I realized that if he's trying to get away from, like, the thugs in that part of the world, he'll be, like, running down the street and be like, okay, I think I lost him. And everybody's going to be like, yeah, he went that way. Because he's, like, he'd be the only ethnic person in the country at that time, basically. And I was like, that's kind of an interesting... I don't know. I've never been there. I don't know what the diversity's like, but still, that's like not an invalid point, unfortunately.
Interesting.
But I think I think we're ready. Also,
yeah,
I think
for sure. I saw like some list of a bunch of different options, and I wanted to say they were saying like some women could play Bond. Like, I think there was a black woman, white woman, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. That'd be interesting.
Sure.
I mean, sure
why not?
They can make whomever they decide to cast. Like, sorry, might hear my clickety clack keyboard.
I think if they're gonna, I think a woman Bond would be kind of a mistake. I think if they want to do a woman spy, like start another franchise. Like, I think that's an awesome idea to have a female spy and follow her exploits as a woman, because women and men stereotypically approach things somewhat differently. Although I suppose that's becoming less, the line between them has become, much more blurred in the last several years. But I still think that being a woman unlocks certain doors that being a man doesn't, and vice versa. So I think it'd be a lot cooler to have, like, a female counterpart, if you will, that's not James Bond, not Jane Bond, but is whatever, and it could even be part of the Bond franchise, where she could be like 004 or something. I would like to see that, I think, also because then it gives you massive, like, crossover potential to have, like, a cool like buddy Bond movie.
So I'm looking at this article, and I can send it to you to peruse, that's saying that a female is going to take on his number, like 007.
Oh, okay.
Nomi, what does it say? No. Sorry, Lashana Lynch will take on Agent 007's role as Nomi after James Bond is sentenced to exile. Spoiler! I don't know what.
Interesting.
But, so this is from this article's from last year. It says she would be the star of No Time to Die, but I'm pretty sure that I saw Daniel Craig in in
Daniel Craig.
the trailers for that. So she's in the movie.
Yeah.
I just let you know in the cast she's in the movie. But okay, maybe it's just because I haven't seen it. Maybe I'm just getting confused here. Like it says he's sentenced to exile, so maybe in the course of the movie, he must get exiled and she takes over 007 or something. That makes sense, right?
That could be. I think so.
So that's not saying that she's going to be like James Bond or she's going to take on the main, role or whatever.
She could. I
Yeah.
could see them like leaving Daniel Craig in exile and then just somebody else assumes the number and it's a different name, different person.
So okay, so Daniel Craig this is a more recent article from September this year. He was being asked about a female playing that role, and he's like, there should be better parts for women and actors of color. Why should a woman play James Bond when there should be a part just as good as James Bond but for a woman? Yeah,
That's what I'm saying.
so he says he's a male character, he's written as a male, I think he'll probably stay as a male, and that's fine. We don't have to turn male characters into women. Let's just create more female characters and make the story fit those female characters.
Yeah, absolutely.
Rosamund Pike, who was a Bond girl in 2002's Die Another Day, has expressed similar sentiments. I think the character James Bond is a man. He is really. Why not make a kick-ass female agent in her own right? Cool. Well, I'm behind in my Bond watching, but I need to rectify that. I would like to watch the last two I haven't seen.
I think I'm behind one still.
Last one I saw was Skyfall, so I'm missing. God, what the heck is it? It was on the tip of my tongue. Spectre, and then
Spectre. Okay.
and then
I
this
saw
one,
that
No
one.
Time to Die. So gotta watch them.
Yeah, they're pretty good. I mean, it's just kind of I don't know. You watch some of the Connery and the Timothy Dalton era, especially, and it's almost it's this kind of really cool blend of like zany gadget in some ways, with semi-realistic seeming spy stuff.
Yeah,
and that's still like, I love Daniel Craig, but he's, if I'm being honest, he's still my number 2 Bond. No one will beat the OG Sean Connery. To the point that I accept as my own headcanon that The Rock is actually a James Bond movie.
oh, because Connery's in it.
Because Connery's in it, they never say what his name was or what he did for MI6 or like British
Are you
intelligence.
sure
or
they
whatever.
didn't say what his name
Just
was?
that he did stuff. Yeah, well, they gave him like some name, and they were like, "Oh, it's probably an alias or something," and they made it sound like, "Well, this is what we're gonna call him," but who knows what his name is? And then, and then there's like there's a fantastic, subreddit somewhere about why he is, and there's like a lot of stuff that builds, and I'm like that. I'm on board.
I would like
I don't know
to
if it's
read
intentional.
that.
I don't
The
care.
Rock is.
I will
okay.
find it and send it to you.
Because The Rock is awesome. It's great. Just fun. Just totally 90s action movie. I know we watched, Face Off recently.
Should we talk about that?
I guess we could, yeah. I would definitely say that The Rock is like at least 10 times better than Face Off.
I think I agree with that to a point. I think I would agree with that to a point, but I think it's just kind of okay. The movie The Rock is 10 times better than Face Off. I'm on board with this, but I think that both movies represent Nicolas Cage at his best.
Yes, I will. Cage is, he is excellent at being Nicolas Cage in both of those.
Yeah,
but
and the ability to turn your own like idiosyncrasies and Nick Cageness up to 11 in Face Off that was probably one of the most impressive things for him and John Travolta to just be like, we're gonna go for it all the way, nothing held back.
So okay, so I think we should watch. So we watched Face Off. I think we should watch The Rock, and we should also watch Broken Arrow, which is a Travolta Christian Slater combo from the 90s. So it's the same kind of, in the same vein.
Wait, as which?
Well, just the 90s action.
Or it's just
over the top, kind of corny action stuff. And then Con Air. You seen that? We should watch. Oof, no. You haven't seen Con Air? Oh, because that's Air. Cage with just an awful like Southern accent. Put the bunny in the box.
So have you seen? I mean, if we're if you got to throw John Travolta's work in Basic in there also.
Basic. I have not seen that.
Yes. Okay, so I'm not surprised.
Is that the one with Demi Moore where she goes through the seal? No, sorry, that's G.I. Jane.
That's
G.I.
Jane.
Basic. Yeah. No, I have not seen.
No.
I haven't seen. Actually, I haven't seen G.I. Jane either, but I haven't seen Basic.
Basic has, in addition to John Travolta, it also has Samuel Jackson, and like a bunch of familiar faces, but like I can't ever pull the actors' names out of the hat.
For some reason, I want to say Michael Biehn. Is he in that?
I didn't think
so. Let's see. Full cast. Oh, it's 2003. Okay. Oh, wow. It's got Travolta, Giovanni Ribisi, Samuel Jackson, Taye Diggs, Harry Connick Jr., Margaret Travolta. Is that his mom? What?
I'm not sure. That might be a coincidence. I don't know.
Interesting.
But yeah, that's a wild ride from start to finish. Not the same as Face Off, but I think I would call them, if I was gonna like organize my shelf by like thematic and kind of I don't know what, spiritual successors and that kind of thing, I'd put them together on the
Face
shelf.
Off and Basic.
Nope. Yeah, nobody's face gets removed and there's no awkward face touching, which, sorry to disappoint.
Okay, all right.
But it's very good. Yeah,
it's got Tim Daly. I don't know if you've come across him in. I know you've been watching The Sopranos.
Oh yeah,
he is in Sopranos. Yes,
is he in Sopranos? I must not have got there yet. I want to say I'm like halfway through season 3.
Okay. Yeah, I think he comes along later.
So,
let's keep talking about. I guess let's talk about Face Off some more. Yeah, lots of weird face touching.
So I had said that was in our previous episode that it is crazier than you remember. Was that accurate?
Yes. Yes, it was. I think it was. I think I'd only seen it like once way back, and so it's been a long time since I've seen it. So I just kind of had like what little I remember, and then like the notoriety, I guess, that it had gotten, throughout the years, like John Woo, lots of doves, crazy Nicolas Cage, and face switching.
Yeah.
And yeah, it had that for sure.
Surprisingly well acted. Just the idea of saying, like, you're gonna be this character and then you're gonna switch partway through because your faces get switched, so you have to act like this character acting like this character in the movie, but you're gonna look like you.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, I mean it's fun. I thought it was a fun movie, and I don't know, it's like sometimes, maybe not sometimes, pretty much every time I watch especially like movies that I really liked when I was younger and enjoyed like back in the day, like, but now if you watch these like those 90s action movies, you're like, man, this is so like kind of dorky, like corny, like the music is just, it's got that like cheesy over the top like guitar riffs,
Oh yeah.
And you're just like, man. And like the lines that they have, some of the lines they have are just over the top, and you're just like, man. I mean, I could see why, and it's like I liked it when I was like, probably I was too young to actually be watching a movie like this.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, it's cool. And now I'm like, man, it's fun now, but you're like, it's almost kind of like now you like kind of make fun of it or something. I don't know. Did you ever see Under Siege with Steven Seagal?
No.
So that was another one that, like, when I was a kid, like on Sunday nights, the network TV, because we didn't have cable a lot when I was a kid. So like, ABC, NBC, CBS, or whatever, they would always show like a movie on Sunday night, like some blockbuster movie that had come out, within the last few years. But of course, it'd be edited, and there'd be commercials and stuff. But Under Siege was one of those movies that they had, and I recorded it on a tape.
Oh yeah.
So you stop it when the commercials come on, and you start it when the movie comes back on. And so I watched Under Siege a lot when I was a kid, and so I watched it recently, because it was on Netflix or something. And I'm like, this one, it obviously it's Steven Seagal, so it's gonna have a bunch of corny, just corny, cringy lines in it. But it's Under Siege is a great film.
Huh. Okay.
I don't know if calling it a film just kind of makes it seem like I'm giving it too much credit. But like, okay, so listen to this. So you got Steven Seagal, you got Gary Busey, you got Tommy Lee Jones.
You had me at Tommy Lee Jones and Gary Busey.
I mean, because they just ham it up, and it is awesome. Like, I mean, Busey is crazy, and he just plays this crazy guy just awesomely, and Tommy Lee Jones also, and Seagal is just whatever. He's just himself. But this is like before he turned into like this real puffy, like just weird fat dude trying to do military movies. Like, this is like Seagal in like his prime. And so, you're like, he's kind of badass, Steven Seagal, yeah. Casey Ryback, a cook. A damn cook.
The crazy thing about Seagal is that, like, even though you look at him now and you're like, you look at him and you think, I could take him in a fight. But then you really do, because he just doesn't look like he's got it. But you can look for videos of him at judo competitions or whatever martial art he practiced, and he's still got it, man. It's insane. Like, people are like, all right, well, we'll do this and let's do like a sparring match or whatever, and he just mows through them. It's crazy.
Yeah, see, he's like, I don't know about you, but I'm like, I still wouldn't want to like fight Steven Seagal, because
no, for sure. For sure.
Yeah, because he's like, I mean, that was his thing. Like, he was, he was big into like martial arts and stuff, and probably did a lot of his own stunts, or maybe all of his stunts. I don't know. Yeah, dude, Under Siege, just check it out. It's pretty awesome. They made a sequel, not as good.
What?
So the first one is set on like on a Navy ship.
Okay.
And the second one takes place, I believe, on a train. And I want to say the only like redeeming thing about it, I guess, I mean, obviously you get Steven Seagal. I think it has, I can't think of her name, Izzy from Grey's Anatomy.
Katherine Heigl?
Yeah, I want to say she is like the female lead in that. Yes, she is. Really? She's his daughter.
Oh.
She plays his daughter.
That might be worth checking out, just because I do enjoy Katherine Heigl's.
I mean, so it came out in '95. I mean, she was like, gosh, she only would have been
10.
17. She's born in '78.
So that was one of her earlier movies.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. probably before, definitely before Grey's Anatomy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Under Siege 2. Yeah, that was. So it's so the Under Siege movies are kind of like a little earlier than the like Face Off, Rock. Like Under Siege 2, 95. I always kind of think of like 95 was like that golden era of of those 90s action movies. So Under Siege, that one I think was like that was 92. Okay. So
I watched The Hunt for Red October.
Oh yes,
which I want to say was in that same
movie.
era.
That was
fantastic.
like I think that was late 80s, early 90s.
Was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I could be mistaken. I thought it was early 90s.
I mean, 89, 90, 91, something like that.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, Hunt for Red October love that movie. Crazy Ivan.
Right. There's some really cool cinematography in that movie for the way that they transition between languages.
Yes.
Because for those who don't know, it takes place on a Russian U-boat, I believe. So like a Russian submarine.
Yeah, it's a Russian sub.
Sean Connery is a Russian sea captain. He's a Russian sea captain. And so they transition from like the languages, like the camera just at first you're like, what's going on here? Because you don't really expect it, and they're just talking in Russian and there's no like subtitles. And then it zooms in on their mouth, and then when it pans back out, then they're speaking in English, and that's like the transition.
So yeah,
which I thought was really cool.
Yeah. So you're like, well, they're actually speaking Russian, but they're speaking so we can understand. But for real, they're speaking Russian. Just
right. Make it easier.
That was that was cool. And for some reason, Josh, I feel like we've talked about this before. I'm having some deja vu.
That might be in our lost second episode of We Can Pop. Okay.
That's
could
very
be possible.
Okay. Yeah, Hunt for October. Great film. It's got Tim Daly. Not Tim Daly. No, sorry. We were just talking about Tim Daly.
Alec Baldwin, Sean Connery.
It's Tim Curry. Totally different.
Tim Curry.
He's the political officer on board the submarine. Yeah, so Hunt for Red October, great book also. And if you fancy a little Clancy,
there's no such thing as a little Clancy.
Yeah, if you fancy 800 pages of Clancy.
I tried to read Clancy once.
Yeah?
Yeah, it didn't go well.
I think I read Hunt for Red October, and this one that is one of my all-time favorite books. Well, or it was when I read it. I was younger, so I don't know if it would still hold up. But Red Storm Rising. So Red Storm Rising is basically like what a conventional, non-nuclear World War III would be like. So so it's and Clancy, of course, very all about military stuff and research, and so I mean it's very in depth,
hyper realistic.
Yes. Yeah, I found Red Storm Rising, like I was in my grandparents' basement, my visiting grandparents, and there's a tub of books that belonged to my grandpa, and I found that in there, and I'm like, oh, this looks cool, and read it, and I was like, man, this is awesome, because I was totally into all that military stuff back when I was a kid. So probably shouldn't have been another one of those. I probably shouldn't have been reading that at that age, but
it's like the weird thing of like I don't know. When I was a kid, I watched all kinds of rated R movies and stuff.
Me too.
Like now, I'm like, show that to. I was like, maybe I should watch this first, just in case it's one of those crazy movies that like seems okay now, because I look back and I only remember the certain bits. And there's been a few movies that I've done that with, and then there's been a few movies that I didn't review before showing them to Martin. And we watched, for example, Coach Carter with my son and daughter, and love the movie. It's great. Don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of like heavy stuff that happens in that movie. There's drugs and drug dealings and shootings and lots of racial epithets and stuff that happen, and it's what I picture is very realistic. So it's fine, but at the same time, like after we watched that all together, I was like, oof, probably should have waited for my daughter at least, maybe Martin, giving him one more year. But
so did you like try to like censor it, like fast forward, or you're just like,
no,
we're just gonna let it roll?
We did. There was a point where it was like, it's too late now. We gotta let it go. Because we had watched Remember the Titans about a year or two before, and in my mind I put those two movies together.
Okay.
Both sports movies.
I've never seen Coach Carter.
Overcoming racism, really?
I've seen
no diggity.
The Hunt for the Titans. Do you remember?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Classic. But that one's pretty child friendly, I would say. Coach Carter, a little less so. It earns its PG-13 plus rating.
It's got Samuel L. Jackson. He's the main guy. Cool.
Yeah.
So were the kids traumatized, or did they have questions, or?
I think my daughter just didn't pick up on a lot of stuff. My son, though, we did have some very good conversations about language and why it's important, and they actually stress that in the movie. They talk about there's a scene where Samuel Jackson's, he's the new coach of this high school basketball inner city team, and he comes in and he insists that they all treat each other with the utmost respect. So he refers to them as Sir, Mr. So-and-so, that kind of, I don't know, coachy thing, I guess. And so one of the players, says something to retort that's, not very nice. I don't know how to describe it very well without giving too many spoilers. But Samuel Jackson's like, no, we treat each other with respect. When we treat each other with disrespect, we're giving license to other people to treat us that way, even though we are deserving of respect, and we will behave this way. And, he really raises the bar for these boys, and it's good. Okay. It's great. I 100% recommend Coach Carter. I'm shocked that you haven't seen it, but
it's just one of those that I just kind of passed me by. I just didn't, never watched it, so I'll have to put that on my list. So speaking of movies and your kids, so Eric has been really he's been wanting to like learn more about like the Titanic.
Oh, really?
So he's been playing this game called Roblox. I don't know if your kids have played that.
Both of them are playing, and Martin's super into Bed Wars.
Bed Wars?
The goal is to go around and break the other team's beds. I don't know what to say, man. Okay,
we'll have to add them. They'll have to all be friends.
Yeah.
So he's been playing that. So you know what it's like. I mean, there's all these many different games you can play, and so one of them that he was really into, which he always wants me to play with, and I'm like, man, I'm like, this is boring. It's called Sinking Ship. And there's a bunch of different, versions of it. And basically what it is like you spawn in the world, and then you're on like the shore, and then you can pick like these spawn points on a ship. So you'd be like, I want to go to the engine room, or I want to go to the captain's quarters. And so then you walk on this little square and you teleport to there on this ship, and then the ship starts to sink. So it fills with water, obviously. It slowly like tilts whatever direction, and I guess the goal is to survive the longest. Like these ones where he's like, Daddy, play Sinking Ship, and I'm like, okay. So I get on, and I'm like, I just go and stand on the tippy, the front of the boat, and I'm just like, yep, sinking.
It's sinking.
And then it sinks, and then like it sinks, and then either when you hit the water, you either like you just fall apart and die like the Roblox characters do, or you swim back to shore and then you start all over again. Whatever.
That's funny.
One of them though is modeled on is the Titanic, and so they there's a lot of like role playing stuff that goes in or that can go into these Roblox games, I think, and So they're all like, they have the sad violin music and all that stuff. So he started asking questions about Titanic, and so we showed him like a clip from the movie, the James Cameron Titanic movie. Heart Will Go On, that.
Oh yeah.
We showed him the scene like when they see the iceberg and it hits the iceberg, and then like the sinking, and so Wanda and I decided to show him the whole movie this weekend.
Oh, did ya?
But we're like, okay, so I'm like, before we're like, okay, I was like it's on Netflix, so I'm like, we could watch it. Like, there are, that one scene we should skip past, right? You know what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah.
There's actually
draw me like one of your French girls.
Yeah. And that's literally what she says. I want you to draw me like one of your French girls, wearing this and nothing else.
Wearing only.
We're like, yes. Fast forward.
Right.
So we skip past that, and then there's actually then there's the part in the car, which we had to fast forward through that. But like you're talking about Coach Carter, it's like, there's actually a quite a bit of, got some, the swearing's not terrible. There's mostly kind of like, veggie, not quite veggie, because it's not really veggie, because it's, taking the Lord's name in vain.
In Titanic. Yeah, it's pretty, language-wise, it's reasonable.
I mean, yeah, whatever. It was PG-13, I'm pretty sure. And,
but not for language.
Yeah, no. And it's, so there's that, and we'd be like, that's a bad word, don't say that. But there's heavy stuff in there too, because it's like, not only is there a suicide attempt, not kind of a pretty half-hearted ish one,
I guess. Yeah,
I guess kind of. And no, I mean, whatever. I mean, was she gonna do it? Was she not? So there's that, and then there, spoilers, there actually is one, like, we were watching and like didn't even see this coming, and then all of a sudden, the you remember like when like the boat's about to sink, and there's that officer that had made that deal with Billy Zane, like,
oh yeah,
he gave him a bunch of money and is like, oh, get me on this boat. And he's like, we had a deal, and then the officer shoots like two guys and kills them, and then like we didn't even like see it coming, and then so you see that, and we're like, oh yeah, I shot those guys, I shouldn't do that. And then the dude, like, consumed with guilt and grief, he shoots himself, and he falls in the water.
There's a lot of heavy stuff in that movie.
Yeah, and I mean, not to mention just the disaster and the dying and freezing and all that.
On top of that,
but yeah, I'm like, I didn't see that one come. I was like, oh, like as it was happening, I'm like, oh no, he's gonna do it. Oh God, what are we gonna do?
Yeah.
So and then Eric's just like, why did that guy kill himself? And we're like, oh, see, he felt bad for killing those people.
Yeah, we tried to in Coach Carter, afterwards we talked about language and stuff, and of course my kids are I don't know, reasonably sheltered. We try to introduce them to age appropriate things, so Martin like hasn't really seen any like rated R movies. Probably the most action packed stuff he's seen is Star Wars or maybe Marvel.
Yeah.
But when we watched Coach Carter, he was like, well, why were they allowed to talk like that at all? Why were they allowed to use bad words and swear words and stuff? Like, that doesn't make any sense to him. Or and there's a scene, because it's an inner city school, there's a scene where they're coming in and they have to go through metal detectors.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like shocked and couldn't understand why. He was like, but they're kids. And we were like, yeah, I know. And I said, this isn't something that's, we just use it as a springboard for him, because thankfully he's old enough to have these conversations now, where we were like, this is what it's like in some places. You're fortunate that your school doesn't have metal detectors when you come in. You're fortunate that your school doesn't have this or that, and that that you have these different expectations. But for a lot of places, this is grade school and high school really are glory days, and then after that, it's like you try and scrape a living, and it's a bleak existence. And so, talked about why it was so important that they learn the lessons that the coach was trying to teach them and that kind of thing. And so we kind of turned around for him, and it ended up being really good. We're not ready for Titanic yet. We've decided.
Yeah, so I guess he had some trouble sleeping after watching that. So and I was so Juan and I were like, maybe that was a little too much.
Yeah. Does he do pretty good? I mean, I don't talk to him a lot. We're not. I don't know.
You guys aren't buds.
Not at the moment. It could change. We'll see what the future brings, of course. But I started watching the animated Avatar: The Last Airbender with the kids. Years ago now. Like 3 or 4. But there's some heavy episodes in the show. If you haven't watched it, I actually do highly recommend it. It's a short show. Each episode is it was like 30 minutes with commercials. So only 3 seasons. And it's just like a lot of cool stuff. But there's a lot of opportunities to talk about expectations and like morality. So the Avatar is the character of the Avatar is supposed to bring like peace to the 4 kingdoms. And there's like a magic system in it that they call bending. You can firebend, earthbend, waterbend, airbend. And the Fire Nation has aggressively taken over and is kind of, you could equate it to like the Empire in Star Wars, if you will. And so everybody keeps telling the main character, who's a kid, who's like a 11-year-old child, 12 maybe, that they expect him to kill the Fire Lord.
Oh.
Yeah. So, and they're like, well, when you defeat the Fire Lord, and they say defeat, that's not like, they're not quite like, well, when you murder him,
because it's like, oh, we're just going to play a game. I'm going to beat him in a game.
Yeah, but there's still fighting in there. And, the main character is like a vegetarian, and he just tries really hard to give people an opportunity to change and do the right thing. And he tries really hard to like, not unalive anybody. But it opened up a lot of conversations about, where your focus is and what honor is, and the importance of that, like respect. And not every episode was like that. Some episodes are just cool and fun or whatever, but a lot of them we had great conversations. And I was like, so what do you think he's feeling right now? What do you think he's feeling right now? Why is he doing this? And I really pushed that a lot, and it seemed to work pretty well. So that was.
Check it out.
Yeah, it's I don't know if your boy's ready for that kind of thing yet, but it's a fun show. No, almost no blood. I mean, and it's like one episode. There's like, I will be very upfront. There's like 1 or 2 episodes where it's like, that was creepy. But the rest of the show is a reasonably light tone, but is a good springboard for those kind of conversations about like, why do they talk like that? Why do they do that?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, I still haven't really gotten him into Star Wars.
And that's why we don't talk much.
Yeah. You like Star Wars, Eric? No. Oh, whatever.
Get out.
I'm done with you. Well, but actually, so I did get him into this game on his iPad called Star Wars, and it's an Apple, as far as I know, it's an Apple exclusive because it's, unfortunately, because it's on their Apple Arcade thing. Mm-hmm. But it's called Lego Star Wars Battles.
Okay.
And it's kind of like, I don't know if you ever played, I think we talked about this in our mobile game episode. Clash Royale was one of mine. Mm-hmm. But this is with Lego Star Wars characters. So but it's kind of the same idea. Like you gain energy, and you play cards. Like you play, different units out onto the board, and it's basically who can who can advance on the other side and take over, in the time on the game. So I mean, he's getting, and he knows, some of the Star Wars characters, and so he's kind of getting into that. So I'm like, I tried to watch like the first like the Phantom Menace with him like a while ago, like a long time ago. He wasn't into it.
Interesting. Yeah, that's the one Martin started with, actually, and he for the longest time that's the only one he would watch. Like we went through them all, and then he was like, that was the only one because he wanted to watch the one with the kid in it.
Yeah, maybe I should throw it in again. See if he wants to watch it. Watch it now. I know there's so many like, films and TV series like with Star Wars now. Like, is Clone Wars would be a good one for him to watch, or is there a different like?
Yeah.
Is there Lego Star Wars, like a series of Lego Star Wars?
Not that I'm aware of.
No.
Yeah, there's Clone Wars and Rebels and Bad Batch. I wouldn't watch Bad Batch until after you finish Clone Wars. But yeah, Rebels or Clone Wars is definitely pretty cool.
Okay.
Show wise.
Okay.
Yeah, as far as shows go. And there's usually like I don't know. Again, if that's something you're interested in, there's some good conversation points in Clone Wars, especially. Like in the very first episode, the clones, some of the clone troopers make a comment to Yoda, and they're like, well, our lives don't matter, we're just clones. And Yoda's like, you have life, you matter. And even if you didn't, you would still matter. And so it's kind of a cool...
Yeah, I think I started watching that on my own, and I remember watching that episode.
The animation in season 1 and somewhat into season 2 is difficult to watch sometimes.
Really?
Like it's really stiff. And it gets better. It gets way better as you go. It's not as bad as watching season 1 of The Simpsons.
Oh, yeah. Well, is this like stiff because it was like earlier-ish like CGI animation, or
yeah,
like, and they're all just like, I am a naturally smooth surface-looking human.
Yeah, I mean, whatever. Yeah, it's so like when you watch anime, it's drawn, right? Or
right, yeah,
and there's like movement in their hair and in their clothes, but in the Clone Wars, there's almost
just
none of that.
Solid.
They're just solid, and it's
like Mr. Roboto.
Fine. Yeah, a little bit. And it's fine. It's watchable. I liked it. It just, you gotta like go in with the right mindset as an adult, especially because.
Well, so you say that, and I remember, I don't know, it was probably a couple years ago that I watched a few episodes of that, and I'm like, I didn't really like notice that, like I didn't see it and be like, well, that's weird. Okay, whatever. I was just like, yeah, okay. Maybe, I don't know, I just didn't have any like expectations of it, so I'm like, yeah, whatever, it's fine. Yeah, so we spent a lot of time talking about something not what we intended to talk about tonight. Do we want to spend some time talking about Lord Brocktree?
Yeah, so we'd promised a few weeks ago that we were going to talk about, do a book talk, and then I got sick, and that kind of derailed some things and whatnot. But yeah, so Nate and I both. Nate, you were at the library and asked me for some book recommendations.
I did,
and I recommended the Redwall books. So these are some books that I read when I was a kid. I was probably like 12 to 13 when I read the first one, and I loved it. But it is anthropomorphic talking animals that go on adventures. And I was we were talking the other night when at our game night, and I said that these are actually a lot of people put them in like the fantasy category. They're more fairy tale based. And I think the difference is that fantasy has like really tight rules for certain things, you know, like if you're reading, I don't know what, any fantasy series, and they break like their own rules that they've built, and like then that becomes an issue and people hate it and blah blah blah. But with the Redwall books, it's like the books typically start with like one character telling another character a story, and then what the rest of the book is the story that they're telling, and it's all like second and
so
third
they're all
hand
like that.
thing. Yeah, most of them are like that. This one was no different. The prologue was you know, somebody, little woodland creatures telling the Badger Lord that they want him to tell him a story. But there's like a lot of I don't know, kind of rich world building in the Redwall books that's pretty good.
So interesting you say that thing about like fantasy. I feel like, at least in this one, and this was my first Redwall book. I hadn't read any of the other ones. There's I guess there's mention of like magic because the villain has like a magician kind of, but they don't. There's really like no magic in the book, so there's no real like, you know, paranormal sci-fi fantasy-ish stuff, you know, in that, you know, in the story itself. I mean, obviously they kind of reference, there's like visions and kind of that kind of stuff, but it's not, you know.
There are things in the Redwall series that they leave as inexplicable, I would say, and they don't ever explain them as far as like how they work, which is one of the things that I think actually makes the series pretty great. So in Lord Brocktree, they talk about the Badger Lords going to the mountain fortress of Salamandastron, and how the main character, Lord Brocktree, or I should say one of the main characters in this case, he feels called to return to the mountain. And then other books, there's like a similar thing where there's always supposed to be a Badger Lord ruling in the mountain fortress, which is inhabited by typically one badger and then like a ton of hares, who don't like to be called rabbits.
Yeah.
So there's that, and in other books they reference like the spirit of Martin the Warrior. He's kind of like the patron saint of the place called Redwall. So it's kind of, but and people sometimes get like visions, and in this book they did, like the villain had like nightmares about Lord Brocktree coming to like kill him basically, and Brocktree had visions of taking over the mountain and different things. Oh. But there's never any like extra explanations of like, oh, you see the Badger Lords or magic or anything. Yeah, it's just they happen.
Well, and so there is also like a bit of like psychedelic, I guess you call it psychedelic, like when the Badger Lord, you know, on the mountain, you know, it happened twice, you know, they go into their little secret chamber, you know, off their room, and then they start burning like incense, and they basically like zone out and have whatever vision quest or something.
Yeah. As an adult, you know? Reading that, I was like, so he like went to his secret room and got high.
Yeah, basically. And he's like, yes. And okay, so they literally have the bodies of the previous Badger Lords in the chamber.
Some of them are entombed there, yeah.
But they're not they're not just like slouched against the wall or something, right?
No.
They're like, obviously some of them are missing because they, you know, perhaps they fell in battle or something, and so they weren't, you know, able to be laid to rest there. There was okay. So there was a lot of cool stuff in the book, and you know, we talked about this again, you know, at our game night last week. You know, it'd be a great, like, if I would have read these when I was a kid, I think I would have really, really enjoyed them. And you know, reading these to your children, I think would be really fun because there's so much Is it Jacques?
Brian Jakes.
Jakes.
It's spelled Jacqueus, but he's Scottish, so it's Brian Jakes.
Just Q's? Jake, yeah. So, I mean, he, writes... The way that he writes the dialogue is just awesome. Although I will say, I found myself when I was reading it, I was like, I would read it out loud because I'm like, this is fun. This is, he's get all these accents and stuff. But then some of it, though, like the mole speak and Bucko, some of that stuff was just like, man, this is kind of a slog to get to read through this. I'm like, I wish you'd just write it,
Yeah.
Because some authors, like, they'll just write it straight, and then they'll add on, like, said car, but he's like, but it came out caw, or something like that.
Uh-huh.
So then you get an idea of what their accent is like without having to read every word of the dialogue as that. So I went on Goodreads after I'd read it and I was looking at reviews and someone all had said, oh, it's such a slog having to go through all this dialogue and they're talking weird and it's like, why, this is so annoying and all this, description of food and all this stuff. And someone else responded and they're like, it's, you're not really the target audience for the, for these books, it's kind of written for, for kids. And I kind of feel the same way because I'm like, it was all right. Like, I thought the book was okay, but it's not really written for someone, my age.
Yeah.
So
my son started reading a couple of the first books, I want to say last Christmas or maybe even the year before, and loves them. Like,
yeah,
he's the perfect age. These were kind of the YA books before YA was a thing at the library. So like the books are, if you go to our local library here, these books are in the kids section, not in the YA, in the children's. But if you go to like Barnes & Noble, they're in the adult fantasy section.
Yeah, I kind of had trouble finding them initially at the library. So I'm like, oh, they're over here. Okay. Yeah, there's so much. It's he builds like such a rich, world, with, and it's really awesome, work that he does with the descriptions and like talking about food and the dialogue and it's, it's good. And it's like, it's just fun to read that stuff. And I get, if you look at that through the eyes of a child who is just kind of, who's learning how to read and really getting into, reading on their own, reading bigger, longer books. I mean, that it's like a feast for your eyes and your brain, to kind of process all that. So
yeah, so this was less than 400 pages. And I don't know if you know this, and I'm sure some of our listeners don't either, but the first book that he wrote, which was Redwall, he wrote it for his he basically volunteered at this place called the Royal Wavetree School for the Blind, and he started writing this story because he started telling the blind kids story, like random stories about animals, and he would do accents and stuff from different regions of Europe because, again, Scottish, he was in England, and so he would draw from European accents to flow into those. So when you start pegging down which species has what accent, it makes it a little easier to say them. And that's why there's so many descriptions of food and the forest and the things that are not always visual based descriptions. They have, smells, taste, temperature, and different things, not just the visual sensations. So that's how these books started. So like as an adult, when I started figuring that out and I did some research on Brian Jakes, and after learning that, I was like, holy moly, that explains so much of why there's so many intense descriptions in these books.
Yeah, and you mentioned that. I'm pretty sure that's what the review, like the response to the review that I was reading, I think, that's what, they put that story out there, and like that's why he, writes it that way.
Yeah.
So, and that's really awesome to hear, to hear that. That's, and it does definitely kind of make you have a more of an appreciation, for it, other than just being like, oh, it was too much, I didn't like it, or I did too many accents, I didn't like all the food descriptions, whatever. You're like, oh, okay, I get it now. So, yeah, it's like I don't know.
I think I would have, in hindsight, I would have recommended a different one to start with.
Sure.
Honestly, I've read most of the Redwall books. Lord Brocktree's, it has a lot of cool characters in it, but it just, I don't know, it didn't hit the mark for me as far as Redwall books go. There's like too many characters and too many side quests and too many
there
like,
were
converging.
just,
and it made it hard to follow, on top of if you're unfamiliar with the animal accents, making it even harder to kind of keep up with who's who.
Yeah, definitely. There was at least like, man, how many different like side quests were there? Like, okay, so it's like,
well, because it started with so you start at the mountain with the previous Badger Lord, Lord Stonepaw, I believe.
Yes, that's
and
him.
then it switches to the invading vermin horde.
So that's two.
So that's two, and then it switches to Dottie for a bit by herself.
Right.
And then she meets up with Lord Brocktree. So that's
and Ruff, right?
And then they meet up with like Ruff, and then when Salamander String gets invaded, one of the hares escapes, and so that's 5.
Four. Is that 5?
4 or 5. Yeah.
See, I'm counting Dottie, Brocktree, and Ruff as one.
As one. Okay.
So yeah, so that hare, is that Stiffener?
Stiffer, yeah, Stiff. The box.
So he meets up with the
squirrels.
The scrounging squirrels.
Squirrels.
Stealing, looting. He takes issue with that. And then like the leader of the squirrels is just a little too intense, I feel.
The leader of the squirrels has like a Puritan, like because she uses like thee and thy, and like hold thy tongues, hare, and
and she's like, don't say bad words.
Oh yeah, she has one of her crews like apparently is mouthing off, and she's like, hold thy tongue, goat. Yeah.
Okay, so
there's 4 or 5 plot threads that come together.
And then these existing parties meet other parties.
Yeah.
And
log.
Yeah, who's so Log. So yeah, it gets kind of confusing. Like Log, and then there's the hedgehogs. Like who's like the king, the hedgehog leader? Not a king, I guess. His wife that clips his
head spikes.
Yeah. Like, do those not grow back?
I don't know. I gotta. Yeah, so it's kind of interesting the way that they have the animals, which I actually like. Each animal has like its own culture, if you will. Yep. And then that way it's very fairy tale like, where rats and stoats, weasels, foxes, those are always bad guys. Like, that's just how it is. They're bad guys.
So there's never a good weasel or a good fox or a good stoat?
In one of the books there is, but he's like mentally slow.
Oh.
So it's you can kind of take that.
So is he like ostracized by the other bad whatevers?
Yeah. And then he's not allowed to live with the other creatures but he lives, but he has dealings with them, and they kind of take care of him and stuff in one of the books.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you said you probably would have recommended a different book, me being like overly ambitious, especially in like reading, as you well know. I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna start like chronologically. I'm gonna do it chronologically. I'm gonna start at the very beginning, and I'm just gonna plow through every single one. So I'm like, which one is the one chronologically that's first? And I'm like, oh, it says Brocktree. I'm like, okay, I'll start with that. So
Yeah,
that's what I did.
they're in.
And yeah,
There's other ones. So the book I started with is just called Salamandastron, and that one's interesting to read now because it has to do with like a sickness that's going around the mountain. So in our current time of viruses,
maybe I should have read that one.
Very poignant. I would highly recommend for anybody who's thinks this series sounds interesting, and they are really good. I would highly recommend starting with Redwall or Mossflower. Mossflower is one of my favorites.
Okay.
The characters are the richness of the characters are turned up to 11 in my opinion.
It's Mossflower.
Yeah. Which I have if you'd like to borrow that sometime, Nate. I'll hook you up.
I promise not to lose it.
I don't want to talk about it.
Maybe you should start taking deposit. Like, okay,
I should.
Give me your money.
Yeah, but overall, it's not a bad representation. It's just not the best either. It's like I said, it's not my favorite. It's not really up there with my favorites.
I mean, yeah, there's a lot, and it's like Brocktree was written pretty. I guess is this guy still alive?
Brian Jakes? No,
Yeah.
he died. Man, he died 2011.
Because I was gonna say like this one. He wrote a lot. There's a lot of books in this series, and like Redwall was written in '86. Brocktree was written in 2000. So I don't know if you want to say like he was more in his prime back in the earlier than in 2000 because he wrote until Brocktree wasn't the last. He wrote 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 more before he died.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'd be willing to give it another shot. If there's Mossflower, if you're saying that one's one of your faves, I'll check that one out.
It is much better. Yeah, it's and it's great because that one is about so much of the books have to do with Redwall proper, which is a location in Mossflower Woods. It has a lot to do with Redwall and with Martin the Warrior specifically.
Okay.
And Mossflower introduces Martin. So even though it's not the first book written, it kind of helps in my mind. I've always liked to read Mossflower and then Redwall.
Okay.
Just because Redwall has so much influence from Martin the Warrior, it carries over, and they talk about him so much.
Okay, so you're selling me on these earlier ones because I will say like Brocktree, it just my overall impression is just kind of meh. Like I'm just kind of like meh. Like the overall plot, the whole problem, the conflict. I'm just kind of like eh. It's like it's like what's gonna happen, through.
Yeah, I will say that most of the books are semi-formulaic.
Okay. I gotta think about who the main audience is, and he's not putting like twists and shocking people with stuff probably, but I didn't feel like really like. I wasn't really like super invested in any of the characters, honestly.
The characters it's just there wasn't enough time to build that up for why you should care about them.
Because he kept switching back and forth between like 80 other characters.
I think I view Lord Brocktree as a book where the author was like, okay, I've written books like this for a while. What if I had like a lot of characters in here? And what if the bad guys had like the high ground? And I don't know. So it's fine. Like it's a nice.
Yeah.
I guess if you're gonna go through and like read them all, it'd be a nice change of pace maybe.
So, yeah, it's like whatever. It's fine. Like, and again, like, we talked about, there's lots of, the dialogue is fun, and the food descriptions are, you're like, oh, that sounds good. Like, oh, that's making me hungry.
Always get hungry when I read these books. The food descriptions are just stupid with how, and it's like, I don't even know if those flavors would go well together. I want to sit down at that table and try that, like,
because he's like, yeah, it's this, it's the tree bark tart with a walnut topping and
a honey glaze or whatever, and
you're like, huh,
strawberry cordial.
It's it's very naturey, obviously. So because they're so you got a lot of flowers and fruits and yada yada.
Yeah, there's a lot of songs and poems in these books, and that's fairly consistent through a lot of them.
I noticed that, and I'm like, that wasn't too bad.
These work really well as audiobooks because the author is the narrator in a lot of them, and then they do like a full multi-voice dramatized read of the books, the ones that he's involved in at least. And so some of those, it's really fun to hear people literally singing and doing the accents and stuff, and the way that it comes off is really fun. But I will say that the audiobooks, I like audiobooks. I like good audiobooks. I like great audiobooks. But if anything slips below that, I just return the book. But these audiobooks are very much like Nebraska. They are not for everybody. They are so hammed up that, like, I had a friend who was really into audiobooks too when I worked at like the sub company from the call center we used to work at. And she was like, holy moly, I was not expecting singing and like a character just belting it out. She was like, I'm not in the proper mindset for this. I can't listen to it right now. But they are really good if you can tolerate that kind of thing.
Does it have like a Broadway musical vibe to it? Like,
not
like
quite.
that kind of energy, like that kind of like over the top.
That kind of energy, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So like when in the books, so the war cry of the Badgers is Eulaliaaaaaaaaaaaaaa, and
is that how you say it?
Yeah.
Eulaliaaaaaaaaaaaaaa.
Per the author's words in the audiobooks, So like in the audiobooks, they yell, like it gets loud, and yeah, it's.
What do they say, like blood and vinegar and
blood and vinegar?
Eulaliaaaaaaaaaaaa.
Yeah, absolutely.
I thought it was funny, I mean, yeah, the Dottie is a terrible singer. That was pretty funny.
But she believes that she's a fantastic singer.
Yes.
I love Dottie.
And, yeah. So does she appear in other books, or is this the only one that?
Oh man, I honestly don't remember.
Okay. The Fatal Beauty.
Yeah. Dottie is a hare who refers to herself as a fatal beauty, and she's on her way to the mountain because basically her family can't stand her.
Yeah, they kicked her out, and
and they're like, you should go learn some manners over at Salamandast from your aunt who's a cook there. Maybe she'll give you a job.
Your Aunt Blanche.
Blanche, yeah. And so she believes that she's what she refers to as a fatal beauty, as Nate mentioned, and she's one of my favorite characters. I think they should have trimmed like a lot of stuff out and expanded on her just a little bit more.
Yeah, because she was an interesting character. Like some of the other one, like what's his name, Gert. I mean, he was all right. I get
who's a mole.
The wrestling mole who was a good cook and.
So what's interesting is like in this book they talk about how he's fastidious, right? Like he's a really clean. Am I thinking of this one? I had to stop. I was listening to Mossflower actually, and then we decided to read this. So some of it's like a little fuzzy for me. So maybe that's actually the mole from the other book. Anyway,
who is it? There is a group in here that's like really messy. Is it
the shrews?
Is it The shrews. Okay.
Yeah, which is
and
funny
it kind of
'cause
like
in real life, shrews are very stinky. Like that's their part of their defense mechanism in nature, and so it kind of makes sense for them to be like messy and fighting and.
well, doesn't it? Oh yeah, they're always fighting too, aren't they?
Yeah.
That kind of like shocks the it's Dottie's crew that meets up with them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're all like, they're like sharing a meal with him, and they're just kind of like just leaving crap everywhere, food crumbs and whatever, spilling things.
Yeah. One of the things that Brian Jakes does really well is he shows like the differences in culture, and then usually shows that when they want to, they work very well together. So like hares are very like upper crust type of people, or beasts they call them sometimes, and then
no beast.
The moles are very down to earth and very sensible, and the otters are really swashbuckling, and then the shrews are always like messy and fighting and bickering, and like that's just so it's really fun to see some of that get layered into the books.
Okay, all right, well, Mossflower will be on the list.
Yeah, you let me know. Maybe we could revisit that and see if you liked it better.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Because Brocktree is my frame of reference right now for Redwall. So
Mossflower is great because it references Lord Brocktree, even though Mossflower was written in 1988 and the book Lord Brocktree is not written until 2000.
Wow.
So I don't think it was all planned out like that. I think he just kind of went back and was like, I don't know who can I reference now?
This guy.
Yeah.
That's great, though. Just the fact that, the way that he came up with, with these stories and the body of work that he created is awesome.
So back when we were working at our first job together, like real early on, so I had to have been only 14 or 15 at the very most. The Lincoln City Libraries, these books were so popular that they did like a day camp based around Redwall. And
really?
Yeah, and the librarians would have like, sometimes they'd have ARCs, advanced reading copies, and be like, okay, so the next book, I think the next book at the time was Loamhedge, and they were like, okay, we know what the next book is going to be called. It's going to be called, and like I remember sitting there, and I was the oldest one there, like a moron. Everybody else was like 5 years younger than me minimum. But I wanted to check it out,
that's okay.
And it was free, and I was there, and I took the time or whatever, and I just remember that librarian pausing. She's like, the next book will be Loamhedge, and everybody freaked out. It was like, and there was like 30 kids at this thing. I mean,
wow,
pretty decent sized group for the middle of summer, and so these, I mean, they were definitely wildly popular for some people for a while.
Yeah, that's cool. I kind of wish, I wish I would have, like, I don't know. I mean, I read a lot when I was a kid, but it's like, for whatever reason, I never came across these books. Never read them.
And, by the time we were getting to know each other, we were at that age where, like, we didn't talk about some of the, like, kids stuff, I do in air quotes, that I was more prone to. I didn't talk about these books because they were, you had to go to the kids section to get them. And I was like, I was 14, man. I'm basically an adult.
Yeah, there's like that stigma of like, it's baby stuff. I don't want to read. Don't want people to know I'm, reading out stuff. And whatever. It's, whatever.
And looking back, I'm like, that was dumb. I should have just been like, you got to read this.
Yeah, this is cool, man. You got to read it.
So fun.
You're talking about feeling like, I don't know, maybe like embarrassed that you were older and reading these books that maybe weren't, weren't geared for you. But then you got all these like, these whatever, the cool kids that were reading Harry Potter, back in, in high school. And you're like, these are kids' books. But it's like they like kids and adults alike, people of all ages, gobbled that stuff up. So it's just kind of like, like you said, it's like, who cares?
Yeah.
Fun for all ages. So
yeah, absolutely. And there's sometimes I've heard these books described, especially on Reddit, which, by the way, if you look for Redwall on Reddit, that's a fine Reddit to find, but the main page for the Redwall books is called Eulalia.
Okay.
So yeah, just if anybody's gonna look that up, which is spelled Eulalia for our listeners, do a little digging if you like. But a lot of people describe Redwall and some of the books as like a very fun sounding D&D campaign.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah,
lots of adventure. I mean, just from reading Brocktree, you're like, yeah, they have some adventures. So,
and there's in the Reddit section of RPGs, a lot of people ask for like tips on how to build their own Redwall campaign and different things like that. Because it's fun. Like a lot of them, some of them of the books are very like, they're very quest based. There's a few books, I can't remember which one right now. I think Redwall, they have to find like an artifact, literally. I mean, it's like just straight up almost a campaign plot. And they're like, they have to figure out riddles and then overcome this. And then, oh no, this happened. And they have to go and do this other thing that they didn't expect and that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's very, it's kind of on my list, my back burner list for right now of campaigns that I want to put together for GURPS and run at some point and be like, yeah, that's right. Everybody pick a woodland creature. If you pick mole, you have to speak like a mole the whole time.
You'd have to have like sample clips of what we should sound like so we could practice. Yeah, there was a little bit of like riddle, or there was at least one instance of like a riddle solving. No, a couple. A couple in Brocktree, trying to get out of the cave and then trying to find Bucko. Big Bones, I think, trying to find his little yank on the golden cord, and you'll be greeted by something. And
the naming for all the vermin is great too. Ripfang, Doom Eye, that kind of stuff. It's all that kind of. I don't know.
I feel like, speaking of like Ripfang and Doom, those are the brothers, right? Were they brothers?
Yeah.
I feel like they were kind of fun, like, bad guys. Like, they could have spent more time on those guys, just stupid crap that they did or whatever. But I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. I think Ripfang and Doom Eye definitely could have had a little bit more time.
Ungat Troon was just kind of like, I don't know, whatever. Just kind of like a cookie cutter type villain.
It was a wildcat.
Yeah. And some of the stuff that he did was kind of cool, but like rapping, like when Jakes would talk about him like wrapping his tail around, when he was like interrogating somebody, and I don't know, just kind of a cool little feline touch.
Yeah.
To some of it, but I mean, overall, I feel like he was like as a villain is just kind of like, whatever.
Yeah. Did they explain the acronym of Gusham in these books? The GUOSIM,
yes.
The Guerrilla Union of Shrews and Mossflower.
Yes.
That's such a mouthful.
He at least like spelled it out once.
Yeah.
Is it like Goisim or Guasim?
Gusham
like,
or something.
Gusham.
Man. I can't say it right now. I'd have to go back and listen. They show up in the different groups show up in a lot of books too, like the Otter Cruise and Logalog and the Guerrilla Union of Shrews are all groups that show up periodically in various other books. Sometimes all at once, but
do the squirrels show up?
I don't remember the Puritan squirrels showing up somewhere else.
Squirrels that like basically tried to starve the rabbit or not the hare. Sorry.
Yeah, they're like, if thou hadst held thy tongue, I could have bargained for, yea, only one bag.
Yeah. I mean, come on. The dude is like on a quest, and he gave up his food, and then they're like, well, we're not going to feed you. Screw you.
And the amount of food that the hares eat too is absurd.
Yeah, he
Like,
talked about
always.
that quite a bit. They're all these other animals are always like impressed or like shocked by how much the hares can put away.
Mm-hmm. And then the hares are usually the ones to bring up food first. They're like, it's nearly lunchtime, eh?
Yeah. They're like dreaming of food. They're like, oh, I could go for one of those tots right about now. And it's like, oh.
Yeah.
And maybe a bit of cordial to top it off.
So overall, like, give it. Why don't you give the book a rating? Because, just
okay. I would say it's probably. I would give it like a C.
Yeah.
It was just. There was cool stuff in it. Like obviously we've been talking about it, and it's. I think it helps to, to talk to somebody about it. Just kind of go back and forth on it a little bit. But it was still, for me, it's just kind of a solidly kind of a meh book. I had already renewed it once from the library, and I couldn't remember if like you could only renew something once. And I was like, you know what? I need to power through this, finish it, so I can take it back to the library. Because it was taking me a long time to read it, and I was just like, ugh, come on. Yeah, so I'd say C.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. I love the Redwall books, but I think
not necessarily his best offering.
Yeah, not necessarily. And there's it's one of those things too where the series overall, a lot of people have given the Redwall books very interesting criticism in today's light, but I'm always bewildered by that because I'm like, he started these books in 1988. Like, he didn't write female characters very often as heroes. Not that they didn't participate in battles or fights or anything like that, but they were never usually the main hero. And it's like, well, he was an old dude. He's so an old white dude.
Yeah.
You want him to try and write a female lead?
Very like traditional, like stereotypical type of like gender roles and.
But I will say, in some ways, you could call him a progressive because oftentimes it's like all the dudes, a lot of the dudes know how to cook, and some of them that's their specialty. So it's not quite like completely, well, the women only bear the young and cook the food.
Yeah.
There's a lot of swapping over, but he didn't have the women as the female characters as leads typically.
Sure. Dottie, I mean, Dottie, like she kind of, I mean, she scrapped with, at the beginning, she got in some, bit of a fight, and she wasn't afraid to, mix it up. And then also, her whole thing with Bucko, that was kind of cool. But, talking about like stereotypical things like, I can't remember what his name is. I think he was an otter. His mom that I was always crying.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, don't go talk to her. She'll just cry and she'll get everything all wet.
Come now, mother. Yeah. Come now, mother. So put the tears away. Yeah.
And they're just like talking about getting like this other, the hares like all when they escape and meet up in this cave, and then all the other female, the hare gets with this guy's mom, and they just start blubbering and crying, and just kind of like, okay, we get it, come on.
Yeah.
It's just like give it a rest, man.
I will say that's not super common in the Redwall books. Like, it's not like the women started crying or anything like that. It's I mean, it's there when it's appropriate, but it's in this book it felt extra.
It was a little over the, like, yeah, and it was just kind of like, it was kind of funny, but then you're You're kind of like, all right, okay, that's enough. Come on.
Yeah. Actually, I think I will say too that kind of in defense of some of these books in general, the especially the books that deal with the Badger Lords really highlight different leadership styles. You know, the Badger Lords are there to, although they're Lord of the Mountains and their word is law kind of a thing, they garner love and respect from the hares that serve them. And that gets talked about in the books. But then, like, the villain, the Wildcat, ruled strictly through fear and abuse. Yep. And
everyone was afraid.
Everyone was terrified, even though he was one Wildcat, and the hordes of the other, you know, animals that served in his horde was just, there was so many of them that they could have taken him out easily, but they all were just living in constant fear.
Yeah. Well, and as soon as, like, you're absolutely right, you know, about the leadership styles. You know, as soon as, like, some horde scavenging party would get, you know, captured or surrounded, you know, they would just, like, they would give up Troon, like, you know, just like that, you know, they'd just be like, oh, yeah. Like, hey, we're done. Please have mercy on us. We don't even like that guy.
Following orders. We was only following orders. Yeah. Whereas the hares and stuff, if they got captured, they were like, till the death.
Yeah, they're like defiant, and they're like, well, how are we gonna get out of this thing, and, you know, get back to our friends. And yeah, you know, if you would have just asked me, like, what if I was gonna read one of these books again, or not again, if I was gonna read one of these other books after this one, if you would have asked me that before we talked about it, I would have been like, nope, just not for me. But now, after talking to you about it, I'm like, you know what? Yeah, I'll do it.
I think if you read Mossflower and you're like, it still was just kind of too weird for me, I'd be like, all right, you're you know, that's cool. You gave it a really fair shake.
I gave it an effort.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Yep. Yeah. I don't think it's fair to judge the whole series just on Brocktree.
Yeah. Not when there's like
what we talked about.
2 books in the series.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, you think about, like, a musician, you know, it's like, you know, that has put out a bunch of albums, you know, they're bound to have, you know, one in there that is either just plain isn't good, or it just isn't your thing, you know? Mm-hmm. So, yeah, doesn't mean the whole, like, body of work is, you know, is whatever, is meh, you know. It's like there's probably some bangers in there. You can check them out. So you gotta be willing to go back to it. So
yeah,
I'll do it.
All right, cool.
That about does it for me, at least for this episode. I don't know. You got anything else you want to throw out there?
No, man. As always, thanks for a great bit of conversation this evening, and
likewise.
I'm always excited when people read some certain books that I love, even if they don't like them. Because then if I read another one later and I'm like, oh man, this happened in this book, there's like a baseline of understanding where you can be like, again, even if you don't like it, you're like, yeah, I didn't like it, but I appreciate what you're saying, and that part sounds cool.
Yeah.
You know?
Definitely. I'm the same. And you know, after, you know, hanging out with our group, you know, our game group quite a bit, I'm like, it's become abundantly clear to me that I should probably watch Doctor Who. Because I'm like, anytime you guys reference that, I'm just like, yeah, that show. There's a police call box, I'm pretty sure. That's about all I know.
I think you should check out the first Eccleston episode and kind of let me know what you think about that.
Okay. Eccleston.
So they had the original series that debuted November 23, 1963. And there's the old series, and then they kind of took a break and then restarted it, kind of. It's not like a full not a full reboot. And so the first Doctor in that series is played by Eccleston. I can't remember his first name right now. Anyway, that's definitely worth checking out. I'd be interested to hear what you think. But those are a lot of fun.
Okay. Eccleston.
Yeah. It's on Doctor Who's on HBO Go or HBO Max or whatever. So look it up on there.
All right.
You know,
Check it out
if you're feeling like it.
Yeah, This is a show that is massive.
Yes.
Massive.
Yes.
So I have to dip my toes in it a bit.
It is. It's a lot of fun.
Okay. All right. Well, I got Mossflower and a bit of Doctor Who to check out. Well, all right. Yes, thanks for the conversation and good as always. Thanks to our listeners for checking us out for another episode. We're on all the social medias and podcasts services, so give us a look and give us a shout if you want us to talk about anything or have any comments, suggestions.
Yeah, if there's a book series you want us to talk about or read, or would love to hear that. No promises that we'll do it, but we'll try.
Definitely, we'll try. All right. Well, with that, I shall bid you all adieu.
Good night, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. You can find The Open Eclectic on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and MySpace. Want us to ramble on about something specific or have a comment on what you just heard? Send us an email at theopeneclectic@gmail.com. We now have a Ko-Fi if you feel like supporting the show. That's ko-fi.com/theopeneclectic. Or support the show by leaving us a review. Thanks. We hope you'll join us again next time on The Open Eclectic.